Hi, I'm Willie Vogt with Farm Progress, and I'm at the Farm Futures Business Summit. Today, I'm talking with Jeff Divan from Sound Agriculture. We're going to get the lowdown on the products there. And I guess, Jeff, what I want to start with, why don't you give us your title again at Sound Agriculture?
Yeah, thanks, Willie. So I'm the Director of Sales Agronomy here at Sound Agriculture.
Great. I guess the first question is, why don't you tell us about Sound Agriculture? Who are you?
Yeah, great. So Sound Agriculture is developing a suite of crop solutions for activating the microbiome. So we've got a great opportunity to get activity out of the microbiome, get more out of our soils, and we're developing solutions and delivering them to the market to get more out of our soils.
Okay, so you and I have talked about Source before. That's basically the core product at Sound Agriculture. But what makes this product different?
Yeah, the first thing that makes it different compared to, when we hear micros out in the market, oftentimes we think of culturing bacteria, and adding them to our soils. So when we talk about activating the microbiome, we've developed a chemistry that we're making a foliar application, and we're actually activating those existing bacteria that are already in the soil. So they're native to that field. They're lying there oftentimes in dormancy, ready to go to work. So we have a very consistent solution where we can wake them up and put them to work in the field.
So instead of sending out live microbes, you're goosing the microbes that are already in the soil.
Exactly. Yeah, you can think of it as a caffeine source for the microbes that are there. We get more activity out of them. Therefore, we pull in more nutrients and provide them to the plant in an available form.
So which nutrients are we bringing to the plant? How are we jacking up that production system?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Source corn and Source soybeans, we are fixing atmospheric nitrogen. So we're bringing more nitrogen in an available and stable form in and around those plant roots. We're also helping to solubilize phosphates. So oftentimes when we have a pH that gets out of balance, we start to tie phosphate up with other things in the soil. So we're able to solubilize that, get it in a orthophosphate form that's available to our plant, and get it into that root zone. So nitrogen and phosphorus primarily, and we're also seeing some activity and some increased solubilization of some other micronutrients as well.
I guess I'll ask the question that sometimes come up when you talk about Source soybean, you talk about bringing more nitrogen to the plant. We don't always think of soybeans as needing nitrogen. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we kind of think of them as a self-sustaining crop when it comes to nitrogen. They've got nodules and they're fixing their own nitrogen through the season. What oftentimes happens, though, is late in the season, we can start to run a deficit. So even though they're fixing their own, the higher yield goals and all of the new strategies that are out there for pushing yields higher with soybeans, we can still run a deficit late in the season. So we're actually activating some of the free living nitrogen fixing bacteria that live on the root surface instead of in the nodules. So some of those same bacteria we're activating for corn, we're getting some increased dosage of nitrogen and phosphates late in the season for that soybean.
So you have a product, a feature called the Product Optimizer tool. Can you tell me about what that is?
Yeah, so as we dig into when and where Source works, there's oftentimes ties back to the soil biology. So we developed a tool called the Performance Optimizer, which looks at pH, organic matter, and CEC of a soil. So really how well that soil is able to both hold things like nitrogen and how much phosphate could potentially be tied up. So when we look at those three items and compare that back to our field trials, we've developed a model that helps predict the performance of the product. So it's something that's in its first version this year for the 2021 season. We'll continue to validate it with further field testing and data. But what it gives us is a really good opportunity to indicate where Source will work best. So instead of purchasing the product as a farmer and kind of running your own field trials and playing a guessing game, we're taking a lot of that off of their hands and we're running that in the background. So we'll give the best and most likely chance of a positive ROI by first running it through that tool and deciding which fields are the best potential.
So let's talk about that a minute. Are you going out and taking soil samples or running CEC, or how are you getting this information?
Yeah, so we actually embedded this right in our website on sound.ag. So under the nutrient use efficiency category, you can hop right in and enter pH, CEC, and organic matter for any field. So you could do that on a one-off basis, or you could send us in soil samples if that field has been sampled. So either of those options, and we'll get that report back instantly on the website, or for more robust to analyze the whole farm, we usually send it back in about a day.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's kind of a neat way to analyze the potential. And yes, I like the idea of taking the guesswork out of any product. So how should growers think about their return on investment with Source if I'm going to make this investment?
Yeah, absolutely. So on average, over the last few years, we've seen about a 7.5 bushel average yield increase on corn. So if we think about today's current prices, pretty easily a 3x positive ROI on that application on corn. So embedded in that, we also have a performance promise, which states that if you see at least that lift in yield, or if you don't see at least that lift in yield equivalent to the value that you invested in the product, they will actually reimburse the producer for that purchase. So two different options there. We can either keep our practices as is and use Source as a yield enhancer. So if you don't get the yield lift equal to your investment, we would reimburse. Or you can reduce nitrogen. So we've seen that Source can contribute 25 to 50 pounds of nitrogen. So you can reduce your nitrogen by 25 pounds and have that value also work against that formula. So if you don't get the value of your fertilizer back and yield, we'll also reimburse you. So really standing behind that 7.5 bushel yield lift out in the marketplace.
I think we're second year for Source corn and first year for Source soybean. I think if my memory's correct. Yeah. What are you hearing from growers this year? And I think you have some second-year growers on Source corn. What are they saying? What are you hearing when you're in the field?
Yeah, so they're really excited about how easy the product is to use. So being a really compatible tank mix product when they're making their herbicide pass or their fungicide pass, very simple to throw it in the mix and not have something that's logistically difficult to keep in cool temperatures, keep out of the sun, just worry about its efficacy. So very easy to use. Also with fertilizer prices, inching up this spring and looks to be maintaining that through the summer and into next season, a very nice alternative that can help us to offset some of that high-priced fertilizer while also contributing to soil health. So the less artificial, fertilizers that we're putting out on that field, the better we can maintain some of our soil environment and ultimately access to more nutrients outside of what we're applying.
So we're talking in June. Is it too late, or can I still use Source? How's my timing?
Yeah, great question. So when we talk about Source, we have a very wide label. So anywhere from V4 to R3, very safe product. The V4 window, passed us. We've had a lot of heat here as of late, so it pushed us through that stage very quickly. Good news is, though, that VT to R3 stage, so our later application window that we recommend, is obviously still ahead of us. So we also see that be the best option in drier conditions. So when we kind of bucket wet and dry, oftentimes we would recommend early application in wet scenarios where you've had some nitrogen loss early. And in dry years, which is a good chunk of the country this year, or at least average, that VT application can actually be a little bit better. So yes, we definitely have the back half of our application window still ahead of us here.
So that brings up an interesting question, because I was driving this weekend, actually, and I was seeing some yellowing in corn. Am I going to target that with Source? Those are the fields I might start with?
Yeah, so we've had a variety of things happen here so far this year. If there is surface applied nitrogen, for sure. So if, a strategy, maybe in a no-till or strip-till environment where a lot of nitrogen gets surface applied, and it's had very little rain in a lot of these 90-degree days, early in June, good chance that a lot of that has volatilized. So Source would be a very good option there when we get later to that VT stage where we need the most N. So that's when we're taking up the most N throughout the entire season is when we're filling that ear. Source would be a great option there to help fill that gap and that void. Because for most producers, once we get to this point, we can't really get out there with any equipment to add any nitrogen back in. So that becomes our late season option to get the equivalent of 25 to 50 pounds of nitrogen into our plant.
And how am I applying that? Am I just with a high boy, or what am I doing with that?
Yeah, so for a late application, VT to R3, we could either do a ground application with a high clearance sprayer, as long as we have 10 gallons of water, or we could do any kind of aerial application. So airplane, helicopter, even drone. As long as we're in with 2 gallons or more of water, we could make that application aerially.
Great. And how do I buy this? Where does a farmer go to buy this?
Yeah, so I recommend that everybody would take a look at sound.ag. So we have resources there to contact us directly. We also have a dealer locator tool. So chances are we might work with a local independent dealer or retailer in your area. So several different options, but Sound.ag is the best place to find those resources.
We've been talking to Jeff Divan with Sound Agriculture. Jeff, this is great information, and we'll keep following and see what's going on with source corn and source soybeans. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Willie.